So, if you don't know yet, I have created a free self-care resource. You can see the video in the top corner there if you want to hear a bit more about the resource in general. I've decided that I'm going to do a video series for the book as well because it's almost 40 pages now and it's kind of an overwhelming wall of text, which can be really inaccessible for some folks. So I wanted to make a video variant for people who prefer to listen rather than read. Each chapter will get its own video, which will also make it easier to pick and choose the chapters relevant to your concerns without having to sift through the whole thing. So I'm just going to start here with Chapter 1, Memory, Focus, and Other Executive Functions. I'm not going to talk about diagnoses in this guide. I'm only going to talk about symptoms. Professional diagnosis is a privilege. You may not know if your issues have a name, but you surely know what your symptoms are. I want the information in this guide to be accessible whether or not you know your diagnosis. Also, there is a lot of overlap in symptoms between conditions, so it makes more sense to lay it out this way. First, let's talk about executive functions. What are they, and what happens when they go wrong? So first we have working memory, governs our ability to retain and manipulate distinct pieces of information over short periods of time. Mental flexibility helps us to sustain or shift attention in response to different demands or to apply different rules in different settings. Self-control enables us to set priorities and to resist impulsive actions or responses. A breakdown in executive functioning can manifest in a lot of different ways. Here are some common ones: impaired memory, impaired focus, disorganization, impaired impulse control. 99% of the time, issues of executive dysfunction nod to additional problems going on in the brain. This is because your brain can only do so much at one time. If, for example, there's an issue with anxiety and the limbic system is stuck in metabolically expensive, repetitive processes, it's spending energy when it's supposed to be resting. Well, your brain runs on physical electricity, which it produces by moving charged ions across the cellular membrane. It collects those ions from the food, water, and air you consume throughout the day. You are a finite being. There is a finite amount of energy your brain can produce in a day. If the system whose job it is to assess incoming danger is using energy when it's supposed to be resting, that energy has to come from somewhere. Very often it gets rerouted, so to speak, from the frontal cortex. Your brain essentially decides detecting danger is more important than doing math, cleaning my room, or remembering where I set down the item I was just holding. So we're going to power down the executive processes so we can fully power the limbic system. This is why executive dysfunction is so commonly seen in mood disorders. Your brain is prioritizing with what it has, and sometimes the most visible symptoms don't come from the most affected area of the brain. They come as a result of the brain compensating for its impairments. Because we're typically not under identical stressors every single day, symptoms may seem to come and go. For example, on a simple week where you may have few responsibilities to worry about and no new problems arise, you may find that your executive functions are relatively unimpaired. However, on busy weeks, not necessarily bad weeks, just weeks where you have a lot of responsibilities where everything doesn't go as planned, or if there's something really important like a meeting, test, event, encounter, etc., going on, you may struggle more with executive functions. Counterintuitively, you may not notice the impairment until after the big week, event, etc. is over. Your brain stacks up all of its resources, powers through the important things, and then as soon as it's over, it crashes to recuperate. In addition to executive dysfunction, it's common to see impairments to mood regulation at the same time, and for the same reasons. Your brain borrowed energy from next week to get what it needed done. But that's impossible to keep up. It has to repay the cost. This means if you know you've got a big project coming up, be gentle with yourself. Your brain will be under increased strain, which means your symptoms will be worse. Don't beat yourself up about that. Warn your friends and family that you've got a big week coming up. Ask for their support as your symptoms flare. But that's not to say there's nothing you can do. There are band-aids for executive functions. For memory, If you're in school or otherwise expected to routinely memorize and regurgitate long lists of information, look up the mnemonic device called the Memory Palace. The gist of the technique is you imagine a hallway or pathway or a particular room, somewhere that's extremely familiar to you, somewhere you walk through every day. Imagine that place vividly. While you're studying, imagine that you're placing the information along the environment. For instance, if you're trying to learn definitions, you might imagine one word and its definition written on your pillow. The next one is written on the wall of your room. The next one is on the door. Then one written on the floor outside the bathroom, and so on. You can use this technique with more complex information as well, by using the same process. Take the quote or formula or what have you that you're trying to memorize, and imagine it written on familiar spots along your familiar place or pathway. As you study, envision walking down this pathway with your memory objects written in strategic places, over and over again. When you sit down to take the test, you'll think of your pathway once more. Although it might sound silly, this technique is very effective at boosting memory. By allowing new information to piggyback on information your brain already knows very well, in this case, the layout of your familiar pathway. For memory issues like remembering if you locked the door or turned the oven off, etc., try creating a ritual around the memory object. For example, I struggle to remember if I've locked my front door, but worrying if it's unlocked triggers panic attacks. Once, I was halfway out of my driveway on the way to work when I threw my car in reverse, parked, ran back to see if the door was locked. It was. That was the last straw for me. Locking the door is too habitual of a behavior. My brain dedicates no energy to that task. It's on autopilot. Because of that, I almost never forget to lock the door, but I also never remember that I've locked it. So now, when I lock my door, I turn to the right, I say goodbye to the garden statue behind my door, then blow it 2 kisses. It's silly, and my neighbors probably think I'm weird, but my brain remembers the ritual, because it isn't instinctive. It's a weird thing I force myself to do, but I remember if I've done it, even though I still don't remember actually locking the door. You don't have to blow kisses to statues. You can say a weird phrase or slap a tune on your thigh or pick up a rock from the ground and carry it to your car. You get the idea. Pick a ritual that isn't too hard in and of itself and do it after the task in question. You may habituate to your ritual over time, but the technique will continue to work with a new ritual. For organization, if you find yourself having difficulty either beginning a task at all or prioritizing which task to do first, practice breaking each task into its component parts and reduce your aim for how much you want to accomplish in any given time period. For example, instead of saying, I'm going to clean my room today, then getting stuck trying to decide if you should do your laundry first, or take all the glasses to the kitchen, or put your books back on the shelf, etc. Try reducing that one task into its components. Today, I will take the glasses out of my room, and that's it. Let that be today's task. Do the laundry on the next day, and so on. If even the component tasks are overwhelming you to the point of being unable to begin the task, break it down even further. Today, I will remove 5 cups from my room, or I will just gather all my laundry off of the floor and into the basket. Give yourself permission to take longer to complete the whole task, even if that means taking several days just to clean one room. That's okay. It's still going to get you a lot further to work for 15 minutes a day consistently than it is to get overwhelmed and be unable to progress at all. If you find yourself stuck in couch lock, thinking about the tasks you need to complete but unable to start, a shift in thinking from I have to get up and do, from when will I be ready to do. Come at the task from the idea that you are waiting to be ready and instead of trying to force that readiness. Executive dysfunction often manifests itself as an inability to get started. You spend a lot of time thinking about what needs to be done, a lot of time wanting to start, but are unable to actually begin. Trying to force yourself to start is kind of like trying to stand on a broken leg. You're putting extra strain on the very thing that is struggling to begin with. That rarely helps, and often generates some negative emotions about yourself and why, no matter how hard you try, you still can't start. Instead, the idea is to bypass the broken limb, so to speak. Or really, a better analogy here is turning into the skid. If you're ever sliding on ice, the instinct is to try to swerve away, but anyone who's ever been in that situation knows that won't work. Just like trying to force yourself out of an executive dysfunction freeze usually compounds the problem. Instead, you want to turn into the slide until your tires regain traction. In this case, that means you want to lean into the waiting period. I know I am going to get this task done, and I am waiting for when I am able to begin. This shift in thinking can help ease the overload on your frontal cortex, which results in this kind of dysfunction. This is not an instant fix, but it can be the difference between struggling to start for 3 hours or 30 minutes. Breaking through executive dysfunction is hard, even when you have all the right tools available to you. So above all else, be kind to yourself. Remind yourself that this isn't a matter of choice. You didn't wake up and decide to sit on the couch, consumed by guilt and despair, unable to begin any of the tasks you want to accomplish. You didn't choose this, and it isn't your fault that it's happening. Blame and guilt are not going to make it any easier to break through. So be real with yourself about your own limitations, and instead of blaming yourself for things that are often out of your control.